Hello and welcome to week 4. Today our question is, what were the historical implications of the Restoration? So although the British were suppressed under the Puritan rule and revolution, afterward, during the Restoration time, the mood of England shifted and it became a culture of decadence. So the three implications of the Restoration was firstly, it ended the Puritan vision of a republic in England and revived the Stuart line. And then secondly, there was a new culture of decadence in English society, and art and society were changed. And then thirdly, the Protestant Catholic tensions were brought to a head, and 50 years of conflict really changed England after the Restoration. So let's get to firstly understanding what the Restoration, that's going to be a hard word to say, what the Restoration was. The Restoration, as the name suggests, it was restoring England after the fall of the Puritans, and after 1658, Oliver Cromwell dies, who was the Puritan ruler, and he is buried in Westminster Abbey, and his son kind of says, you know what, guys, I don't really want the position, like, you guys take it, I'm fine, and so the Puritan rule is ended, and a lot of the people that were exiled, like Charles II's son, Charles the first son, Charles II, and all these other royalists, royal people, not royalists, they returned to England. And during the Restoration, a lot of political moderates from all sides of the political spectrum, they came together and they wanted to reestablish a stable form of government, which they didn't have. And they're like, guys, we need to come together. We need to do this. Let's get this thing done. And so that's exactly what they do during the Restoration. So let's get into our first implication of the Restoration, which is that the Puritan Republic was demolished and the Stuart line was revived. So, the Cavalier Parliament met from 1661 to 1668, and this Parliament reinstated the Anglican Church. It disbanded Cromwell's army, and it forgave political prisoners, except those who had signed off to kill Charles I. So this Parliament really is like demolishing the Puritan rule and taking apart all of it and trying to rebuild. And guess who comes in and is king? Charles the frickin' II. He's my favorite. My hair kind of looks like him today. I just need to scrunch it up here. Then I'm Charles. I look like Charles. Oh my gosh, I do. Anyway, so yeah, Charles II returns from his exile and becomes the king, people, and he is paid a sum of £1 million per year to be the king, okay? And by today's standard, that's not just $1 million. That's it's a crazy amount of money by today's standards. I think Parker compared it to 1 trillion. 1 trillion. Imagine, that's a crazy amount of money. And his return was pretty peaceable, except for the Cavalier Parliament that I touched on a bit earlier. They really want revenge on the Puritans who ruined their life and restricted them And so they set up all these acts to kind of punish the Puritans. And one of these acts is the 5 Mile Act, which commands that no Puritan pastor live within 5 miles of his old church. So they really try to get rid of all these Puritan communities. And they also took away the freedom of press in the 1662 Licensing of Press Act. And kind of do all these not rash things, but very bold things this Parliament does. They reinstate the Anglican Church as the Church of England, and Charles II kind of keeps his mouth shut, because after all, they're paying him a lot of money, so why argue with people that are paying you, and that's kind of really gives us an idea into the kind of king Charles II was. He ruled knowing that he had a very loose grip on power, and so he didn't really stir the pot. He didn't really rule his nation. He preferred gambling and hunting and breeding dogs that looked like him. And so, yeah, he really didn't spend a lot of time managing his country. And sadly, he also had no rightful heir, but he did have 13 children off the books. And he gave these children the last name Fitzroy's, from meaning son of the king. So anyone with the last name Fitzroy's, everybody knew that's the king's son. So yeah, he didn't have any legitimate children though, and so he chose his brother as the heir. But yeah, Charles II, pretty funny guy. He really just kind of comical, and we can see this side of Charles in the story of Thomas Blood. So Thomas Blood is this Irish guy who befriends the head guard of the Tower of London, and he befriends this guy, and one day he comes to see his friend, the head guard, and Blood knocks the guard with a hammer, like on the head. Bam! He's knocked out. And so Blood goes to the room. He's unsupervised. He has all the jewels at his fingertips, and he stuffs them in his pants. He flattens them so they all fit. And then he walks out of the frickin' tower, and he's about to get away and successfully steal the crown jewels when all of a sudden, the guy, the head guard, wakes up and he yells, "Treason!" And then Blood guy is caught, which is kind of sad. Yeah, and Blood refuses to talk to anyone about the crime he just committed. He says, "Let me see the king, let me talk to the king." And so they reluctantly let him have an audience with the king. Charles II meets this guy, and he kind of has a thing for the outcasts of society and the weird people. And so Blood tells him his story of how he got the jewels, and he really wins Charles II over with his antics. And not only does he convince Charles II to let him go get off with a crime and not go to prison, he also convinces the king to pay him money and give him land. King pays him £500 a year, gives him a nice little place to live, and in return, Charles just asks that Blood comes back and tells him more stories. So yeah, we see this kind of comical example of just Charles II just having a good time, living life, and kind of knowing that he has such a loose grip on power. Poor guy. So he just kind of wants to have fun. And that kind of gets me into my second point, which is that the second implication of the Restoration was a culture of decadence and a change in the art and society. So during the Puritan rule, everything was restricted. You couldn't play games. There was no sports. They had no holidays to celebrate. Literally every fun part of life was just sucked out by the stupid Puritans. And so when when the Puritans are out of power, everyone just kind of takes a breath of fresh air, and they just want to make up for all this lost time of not having fun, and they want to live and soak up life. And there's a lot of culture. There's a culture of decadence. And the word decadence is a really interesting word. Decadence actually means to decay, which is funny because we often think of decadence as extravagance and richness, but that's actually not what it means. But anyway, this is kind of the outlook of the English people at this time, Charles II included. And Dr. Parker says that because Charles II has a tenuous hold on power, this gave the culture of the Restoration a unique feeling. So we have this king who's kind of not really holding on to power very loosely by a fingernail. But then also Charles II is really influenced by the culture of Versailles and Louis XIV. He spends some of his time in exile in the Versailles court, and this really influences style of just he loves the art and culture of France, and he brings that with him back to good old England. So yeah, after the strict rule of the Puritans, music and theater and other decadent novelties were revived and brought back, including theater. They didn't have theater for 18 years. So after 18 years, the theaters are reopened. And Christy Ferrari, not like the car, I don't know how to say her last name. Anyway, she says that the Restoration Theater was truly a unique era of plays and playwriting. When Charles Stuart was restored to the throne in 1660s, the theaters were reopened after an 18-year ban. Restoration Theater became a way to celebrate the end of the Puritan rule with its strict moral codes. Restoration plays were lavish, often immoral by Puritan standards. And a lot of plays were rewritten with happy endings. Plays such as Romeo and Juliet were rewritten with happy endings. So, also, George Norman Clark speaks about Restoration theater's tendency to immorality. So, Clark describes it and says that the Restoration Theater mocked all restraints, and some of those were gross and others were delicately improper. So they really tried to mock restraint and kind of push things and standards to the next level. And yeah, after years of tumult in England, after years of strict rule, people wanted to feel like they were actually living, and they wanted to mock restraint. So I think that is really key. What George Norman Clark says really kind of sums up the Restoration spirit of mocking all restraint. And then the third implication, numero tres, we're almost done. The third implication of the Restoration was the Puritan Catholic tensions were brought to a head. So Charles II had watched the death, or had experienced the death of his father, who was executed by the Calvinists. And after his time in France, Charles II kind of becomes sympathetic towards the Catholics and kind of less likely to like the strict religious rules that he saw affect people around him, right? And on June 1st, 1670, Charles II signed the Treaty of Dover, which is between Charles II and Louis XIV of France. And this is a secret treaty that says that Charles will convert to Catholicism and will bring England under the Catholic fold again. And some of the implications of this treaty was that Charles ended a lot of anti-Catholic laws and allowed freedom for Catholics and less restrictions for them, which is sick. Anyway, and then also Charles got paid £250,000 for this treaty, which is kind of impressive. So yeah, he gets paid to be Catholic, and he says, "Hey, more money the better," you know. And so yeah, the Cavalier Parliament isn't super happy with Charles II, and they were a bunch of high church Anglicans, and they were opposed to religious tolerance. So they're like, no, Charles, we're not doing that. And so they make Charles II back down on a lot of these anti or pro-Catholic, I guess, not anti. They make him back down on his policies, kind of weaken him, sadly. And then we have this quote from the Treaty of Dover that says, "The King of England will make a public profession of Catholic faith and will receive a sum of 2 million crowns to aid him in this project." So this is from the direct source that basically says what the treaty says, which is what I said. But then in 1673, we have the Test Act, which commanded that if you were going to take public office, you had to denounce Catholic beliefs of transubstantiation. So yeah, there's this war, Catholic, Protestant, blah, blah, blah. And in 1685, Charles II gets a stroke. I don't know why I said it like that. He has a stroke, and on his deathbed, he has a Catholic priest come, and he converts to Catholicism, keeping his promise with Louis XIV to be Catholic. And then his brother, good old James, steps into power, and he is a Catholic, and he puts all these Catholics in positions of power and rules, and gives Catholics high-ranking positions. And as we talked about before, Cavalier Parliament really not happy about religious tolerance, but they realize, you know what, this King James guy, he's 55, he doesn't have any heirs, and so there's no threat of another Catholic ruler, and they know the next ruler is going to be Protestant, so they really don't have much to worry about until James II. I don't know what his wife's name, but his wife gets pregnant with a rightful heir. What are they gonna do, you know? And this gives the possibility for a Catholic heir, which isn't great. So, 1688, I mean, not 1688, I think after that, the Parliament calls over across the river. I don't know if it's across the river, but they send for William of Orange and basically say, "Hey, look, your father-in-law here, we don't like him. Can you come be our Protestant king? We hate Catholics. We want to get rid of him, And so William of Orange says, sure, I'll come on over. I like England. I like fish and chips. And so he comes. And he takes over. So yeah, anyway, that's the Viva this week. So historical implications of the Restoration. First, we see that the Republic in England is destroyed. The Puritan Republic, I should say, and the Stuart line is revived. And then second, we see art and society in England transformed and a culture of decadence be created. And then third implication is that Protestant and Catholic tensions were brought to a head. Anyway, bye guys, have a good week. I hope you're doing well. I really am. I did this in 20 minutes. That's, I think, a record. So anyway, I hope that was clear. I hope it wasn't too distracting. I'm trying to get better. I'm really focusing. I'm doing it at a time. You don't care. Anyway, bye.